Can everybody hear both in the room and online?
Yes, thank you.
Good, Dave. Thank you very much for responding.
Yeah.
The agenda pack with papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council website via the link that was sent out to members. The agenda and reports have been published in two parts, the main agenda pack and supplement 1. Agenda pack contains items 5 and 6, and supplement 1 contains agenda item 7. Appendix N of Supplement 1 has been published as a confidential appendix, so is only available to view in the confidential part of the mod.gov app. It relates to council tax write-offs in excess of 100,000. As is, I think, customary, we will, if we possibly can, avoid straying into pink paper territory during the course of our discussions. If we do, then you know the form, we will have to go into confidential session. But if we can avoid doing that in the interest of transparency, it would be greatly to be preferred. As ever, when you're addressed to speak by me, could you please state clearly who you are for the benefit of anybody who's listening to the meeting so that they can identify who is speaking? And please ensure that you use the microphones if you are in the room. And I think we have been finding with these microphones that you have to hold them pretty close. Yes, nuzzle up to a microphone and then we might be able to hear what you say. The meeting is going to be audio recorded by the council. And as agendas are now viewed electronically, please can members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everyone present in finding the appropriate information. There is not expected to be a fire alarm, but should this happen, please follow Democratic Services officers, and as in all things, and they will lead the way out. Okay. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutes. The first apology is from Jamie Jackson, who is with his father in Scotland at the moment, I think, because his father's unwell. So we have apologies from Jamie. We've also got them, I'll carry on, Helen, if I may, I think, from Andy Soughton and Mike Murphy, from Nick Cottle, who is substituted by Steve Ashton. Welcome, Steve. And from Tony Locke, and he is substituted by Dawn Johnson. Welcome, Dawn. Are there any other apologies? Anything from Philip Ham that we know of? No? No. Okay. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any interests that members wish to draw to the attention of the meeting, please? Dawn.
Can I just check something? With being a vice chair of scrutiny, will that need to be a declaration when it comes to that item on the agenda? No, thank you.
Okay, anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Right, agenda item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting. And this was the very long meeting that we had on the 24th of February, which I'm sure you will all remember intimately. Now, we have a query on that, don't we, Councillor Mansell, which I think you would like to raise.
Yes, thank you. So I was a substitute at the last meeting, so was involved at the time. It did seem to me that one of the key items on the debate on parking charges was the request for early consultation. And I did check, but it wasn't recorded in the minutes. I did check the recording and the transcript and noted that was strongly mentioned. In fact, in your summing up, Stephen, you said there is a very strong feeling that there needs to be a comprehensive consultation before anything really comes forward to members. So it was one of the strongest points that was made, but it's been missed out. Could I suggest some words be added to the minutes, which I did circulate to Democratic Services last week, So it would say, Councillor Stephen Pugsley proposed that the proposed changes to the parking policy were premature and further work, and this is now the new bit, and further work, including comprehensive consultation, then as at present would need to be done on it in terms of impact on equalities in the local economy before it comes forward to members. I believe that was what we actually discussed and agreed at the time.
Thank you, Councillor Mansell. My own feeling is that I'm perfectly happy with what you're suggesting as an amendment to the minutes, which is basically that we add after and further work, including comprehensive consultation. This is at the bottom of page 20, by the way, members, on the resolution, bottom of page 20. So just to recap, the proposed changes to the parking policy were premature and further work, including comprehensive consultation, would need to be done on it in terms of its impact on equalities and local economy before it comes forward to members. I'm happy with that on the whole, but do any members of this committee have an issue with that? Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the point that as every parking order goes out for consultation, if the council were to go out to consultation before bringing a parking order forward, which consultation means more? The one that has happened before the parking order is published, or the one that happens as part of a parking order in the same way as a traffic regulation order? And I'm told that when a parking order is a significant change, that consultation period is longer than it normally is for a TRO or a parking order where there's just the change, like going up by 10 pence. So my concern is a genuine concern, is that I see people going in on, say, social media, having their say on a pre-application for a housing development, and then they think they've done their bit in the consultation, and then they do not come forward for the official consultation that is part of the planning application. So I am just concerned that people may contribute to a first consultation and then miss the official consultation.
I understand the point, Councillor Lation. I think, however, what Councillor Mansell is saying effectively is that there needs to be widespread, comprehensive consultation before it comes back to members, and that was the import of what we were discussing at the last scrutiny meeting. And I think it's a fair point what Councillor Mansell is saying. That really was, I think, what we felt at that, and therefore the minutes should reflect that. What you say, I'm sure, is perfectly true. We just, as members, need to make sure that we've satisfied ourselves that everybody has had a genuine say on this before a final decision is taken. That's really the import of the change, I think, that Councillor Mansell is putting forward. Yes? Yeah. So, members, are you happy with that change? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dave. So, subject to that change, are you happy that we accept the minutes? Yes, everybody in favour? Super. Seconded? All those in favour? Lovely. Thank you so much. So, item 4 is public question time. And I don't believe we've had any questions from the public. No? Right. Well, in that case, we'll move straight on to item 5, which is the Somerset Corporate Peer Challenge final report. And Bill Revans is down to present this or introduce it.
I think Liz is, because Bill's on holiday.
Ah, well, in that case, we have the delight of Councillor Lation instead. So welcome, Councillor Lation.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will just give a very quick introduction to say that this was an exceptionally busy but very rewarding week that we spent in November of last year. And we had some of what I believe are the finest minds working in local authority with us as our peers, who were able to bring experience from right across the whole country and many years of experience. And we are today going to, I will pass over to first Alan Jones and Sarah Hawkins, who will take you through the intention for this afternoon. But I also want to make the points, as we all know, that we also have our own annual governance statement. We have the Grant Thornton annual audit report, as well as this report from the Corporate Peer Challenge, and also the SIP for review that was commissioned by MHCLG. We are not short of good advice. There's no question about that. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to hand over first to Alan Jones and then to Sarah Hawkins.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank
Light.
you.
Thank you very much. So, Officer Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So just I'll be really brief as well, just to follow the process. First and foremost, the corporate peer review took place at the organisation's request. We sought advice and guidance from the LGA, and we were the first new local authority, new unitary local authority to go through the peer review process since vesting day. It was a decision that was taken very early on in since vesting day in order to ensure that we were both fit for purpose, but also understood our organisation and any areas that required further development and insight. As Councillor Lechon's already mentioned, it adds to the suite of external advice and guidance that we've received so far. And really the purpose, before Sarah just takes you through some of the key points that were highlighted, the purpose of today is to provide Scrutiny an opportunity to not only see the recommendations and debate them fully, as you would, but also kind of help and influence any of the actions or activities that you believe should be included as part of the process of developing our action plan prior to it being considered by executive. Obviously, we are developing that action plan as we speak, but unfortunately, the timescales didn't quite work in order to ensure that you have a full plan to scrutinise. So rather than not allow Scrutiny an opportunity to debate it, we thought, following conversations with the Leader of Council, that it'd be appropriate that you had the opportunity to debate it fully and transparently, and we can then take that as officers and include it within the action plan report moving forward. At that point, Chair, I'll hand over to Sarah to provide guidance on the key points from the report.
Thank you, Alan, and good afternoon, everybody. So you'll see in the peer report lots and lots of valuable narrative and 24 key recommendations that they have made. They have made those obviously by looking at their 5 pillars of what makes a good council, so local priorities, leadership, governance, financial planning and capacity for improvement. So those 24 recommendations span all of those areas. Just picking up on both Liz and Alan's points, because those recommendations, we know a number of them are consistent with the feedback that we have had from our auditors. So in our annual audit review, in some of the SIP for feedback, therefore, we have a number of actions that are already in train. So what this has given us the opportunity to do is to look at those and ensure that we are sequencing those in the right way, that we have got the right actions in place. And that is why in the first appendix today, we have outlined some of those things where actually some activity has already been completed against those recommendations. And a lot of that, unsurprisingly, relates to the budget setting that we have just been through. So what we've tried to do in the main report that you've got in front of you is pull out some of those areas where we feel Scrutiny have significant opportunity to influence those areas. So we'd like to understand, what would you expect to see in our action plan that we are pulling together? But I would just say, you know, obviously it's not limited to those areas. Feedback is welcome across all of the peer feedback. So we've set some of those out in the report, as I say, and what we've tried to do is include some information on things that we're thinking about in response to those, so that you can then give us your steer in response to those. I think I'll pause there because it's probably a case of inviting the feedback and talking that through with you. Other than just to say, after this item today, I believe the alignment of the scrutiny function and review follows this item. So there'll be an opportunity to get into the detail of that one as part of that separate item. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. So essentially then, this is an opportunity to pre-scrutinise the action plan and help set the tone for that, and discuss any items that we think should form part of that. Yes, but equally, we've then got the opportunity to scrutinise the action plan once it's formulated.
Absolutely, Chair. So as part of the process, the timescale will require us to publish the action plan by the 12th of April. So clearly the opportunity to go through a formal scrutiny of that will be challenging by that point. But what I would say is that the actions are not set in perpetuity. Clearly they can be areas for development and scrutiny as well. One of the elements that I would like to get into as well as part of the final kind of recommendations is having guidance from you as a committee of those items you would like to dive into in a bit more detail as part of your forward plan. So which areas of search would you believe are appropriate that require more engagement from scrutiny or more analysis or more control from your perspective that you would like to see feature as part of your forward plan? So once that action plan is set up, undoubtedly there are going to be some of those actions that are relatively vague at this point in time. For example, develop a programme of culture and behaviour across the organisation. Now clearly you will want, I'm sure, given the other points you've made through the restructuring process, to have sight of, well, what will that mean, when can we engage in it, and what will this mean for members? They were the questions you posed previously. So I can imagine that being part of your forward plan, but equally I can also imagine budget planning and asset disposal, a number of items being part of that process, as well as the development and review of local community networks, which you've also been very clear about your views on moving forward. So they're the sorts of things we'd like to get to today, so we are clear as officers those matters that we need to programme in as part of your forward plan.
Right, thank you very much for that bit of clarification. So the first hand I'm seeing up from a member is Councillor Trimnell.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I made a few notes when I was reading through this. And obviously our attention was drawn to those sort of certain elements. And I know that you said that there's a wider discussion to be had about everything. But I did focus on those. And what I wanted to know was, there's a recommendation to create a people strategy. Who's going to be responsible for that? Because it feels as though there are so many recommendations, I think, as Councillor Lashon pointed out, from the different external bodies at the moment, that we're in danger of almost running the council for running the council's sake and taking our eye off the ball in terms of delivery. And I'm not saying we are taking our eye off the ball, but there are so many things that we're supposed to do that it worries me that actually we're becoming very inward looking as a result of all of this. So I wanted to know about that, whether we have the capacity to be doing all of this. I also wanted to know about the pay and grading structure, because obviously that was sort of a fairly sort of, I guess they would see it as a key recommendation. Now, obviously, we are just recovering or starting to make some kind of recovery from some difficult financial circumstances, and there's a long way to go yet. What I want to know is, would that be done in mind of what financial resources we have available to us? Or will it be done ignoring the financial situation we're in, and therefore we could end up in a situation where actually our pay obligations become much higher than we were expecting or hoping for, and therefore we could end up with more potentially job cuts in order to pay people more perhaps for the roles they're doing, or maybe less, I don't know. And then finally, the kind of deadlines, some of it seemed to suggest it was end of Q1, end of Q2 of this year for some of these items. Some of them don't seem to have deadlines at all, but I just wondered, they're coming back in a few months. It said 10 months, and I wasn't sure if that was from November. But if that's the case, when are they coming back? What are they expecting to see? Surely not all of this addressed within that period of time. So are you prioritising what can be done? Sorry for all of those questions, like too many, I know, but thank you.
Thank you. And I pick up that last one first in terms of timescales. So it is 10 months since they first visited. So they will be back with us around September, October time, and they'll be looking at progress we have made in response, looking at our action plan with us, but looking at evidence, looking at data, and an opportunity for us to use them as well in terms of any areas we want to focus on. And the action plan will, whilst there'll be a few things, as I've said, that are already completed, it will be looking from 25-26, the new financial year forwards, for a period of 18 months. There is a lot, obviously, in quarter one, quarter two, because of some of those key foundations that we need to follow through that have been highlighted. So in terms of the capacity to act, and you make a really good point in terms of the various action plans that we are responding to, and therefore the capacity that takes up. One of the peer recommendations actually related to how we as a council are making best use of that insight to then act and to focus that activity. So in the new action plan, with the support of our new performance management system at the council, we will be able to have a gain a view, instead of looking at them in silos, gain a really holistic picture of the overall, the sum of the whole, if you like, to look at overall sequencing of these improvement activities, because as we've said, we've got the same action that relate to the corporate peer challenge, the AAR, so that within itself will actually be one of the early deliverables within the action plan to enable us to work more efficiently, more effectively, and focus our efforts in the right places. The pay and grading, there has been allowance made, I believe, in the medium-term financial strategy for the pay and grading review. So that's already gone into that medium-term financial plan to obviously manage the risk that there may be additional cost to the council. Yeah, and that's over 2 years.
Right. Councillor Osborne, if you can hear us at home, yes, sorry, we've got a very attractive bit of rather abstract modern art going on. So you might need to turn your camera off. Thanks, Sue. Right, I've got Peter Sieb, Councillor Sieb to start with, followed by...
Thank you, Chairman. Is this coming through okay, or do it? I'll move it a bit closer. If we're looking for work items for the future for ourselves, I think one of the themes coming through in the report is empowering staff, and another is a cohesive picture of performance and finance. I think we should probably consider looking into those three areas as a single entity. In a previous life, I produced it was for procurement, but basically every member of staff could see the impact of each decision that was within their budgetary control straight away, while still seeing it in the context of the whole year, and indeed in this case it would be the MTFP. And I think that's an important thing to do. If you're going to empower staff, you need to provide them with the ability to make decisions with as much information available to them on the impact of a decision as possible. And I just think, we may want to actually look at the way in which we budget, the way in which we measure commitment, the way in which we look at future cash flows, right down to the individual person level in order to do that. So I think it would be worth, as a committee, discussing the potential for really using the finance and performance systems to inform the detailed decisions. And I am thinking about getting it right down to the weekly manager's brief in Revs and Bends, for example. That sort of level of feedback, because it's only really giving very good feedback to staff that we can expect them to work together to achieve the corporate aims, which are to improve the council, to complete the joining up of the previous 5 authorities, and to do so within a very tight financial envelope. So I think that's an area we would want to look at.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Seeb. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Really helpful to see the report, but I don't think that as a councillor it was totally surprising what the themes that came out with were. I think it has reflected a lot of the concerns that people, councillors, staff have brought up or talked about. So it's useful to have it to set the priorities on where the conversations going forwards. I just want to pick a couple of particular ones out. I do agree with what's been said by Peter about the financial and empowering staff. I think there's also an element of empowering councillors. I'm not sure it's quite captured when you're on page 32. You have a number 18, member and officer leadership, and it's sort of talking about interaction and development. For me, it's about those interactions between the council officers, workers and councillors. And that was what I saw coming into the report. And it didn't quite seem that that had got captured in the priorities set. And I would be interested to hear how you are going to further develop the relationships between officers and councillors. It's not an uncommon theme for councillors to be feeding back. They're very frustrated about how they hear about things, that they hear after events, that they're not involved in decisions. And as Peter was talking about empowering staff, we need to make sure that councillors are empowered with the information before it goes public. I recently had a disastrous situation where children didn't get into a school who have always previously got into the local secondary school. I understood that that had been known for a month or so beforehand from members of staff, but nobody had thought to let councillors know. And I think there is a real cultural shift needed to happen within the organisation. I have to say, having worked at a district, I found it quite different from the attitude of some of the staff, not all the staff. Some are incredibly supportive to councillors and the work they're doing and have a full understanding of councillors' work. I think there is much work to be done for some departments to really understand how to work best with councillors. And I didn't feel that was captured really in your priority setting. The other one that I'd like to raise is the LCNs. It says, looking for further development. I think it's a much bigger issue than that needs exploring. I think the resourcing of the LCNs is a huge issue. I've been chairing an LCN for 2 years, and I've been trying to raise things that would help and improve that role and that the success of an LCN without getting any of those things implemented. It's been incredibly frustrating. I understand 3 link officers have now resigned, so resourcing going forward is going to be a huge issue. They're already quite stretched, those link officers. Again, struggled with getting council officers to fully understand the role they may have in supporting an LCN, because quite often they say they're too busy to come and talk to an LCN, or they're not fully backing up an LCN's work, which is very frustrating. And I'm also slightly concerned that we've got a SWOT analysis taking place, and then we're doing another review. Is that not duplication of work? And just wondering, is there other expenses involved there that actually it doesn't make a lot of sense to be doing 2 analyses at one time? Thank you.
Officer Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'll deal with the first point in relation to broader member engagement. I think, like you, Councillor Johnson, actually, I was slightly surprised that the peer review report focused solely on or not solely, but principally on the leadership, officer leadership and member leadership dynamic, and being focused particularly in the development of that. It didn't actually say a great deal on the broader engagement and awareness raising with members as part of that process, and it wasn't writ large within that. I think what I would say to the committee is that this is our action plan, so it can include whatever we want it to. Just because our peers have said something doesn't mean that we can't include something that you want to see as members and want to kind of have included as part of this action plan. It's a question that I think needs to be answered as part of that process. As Scott often reminds me, we are very rare in the fact that we have a TLC reference within our constitution, tell local councillor. It's not a usual construct, and yet we have one So I think it's something for us to reflect on, the fact that we still need to be able to ensure that members are aware of activity in their local areas, they're aware of key policy developments, they're aware of key bits of information. And I think that's something we'll need to feed back as part of our cultural review. So we can certainly take that away and consider how we would include that within the recommendations and as part of the actions moving forward. I think as part of that, I welcome the points around empowering staff, because that's principally what the staff said as part of their feedback to members. It's a regular element of feedback from our service directors around ensuring that they have all the, if you like, tools in the toolbox to do the job they're employed to do. But in addition to that as well, making sure that you as councillors also have all the information at your fingertips that's necessary for that. Clearly, there's an organisation of our size and scale. You're not going to have everything, but we can certainly put as much out there as possible so you can dive into the information as and when required. So that's the first point. The second point, in relation to local community networks, I think we can see within the report there's a clear recommendation around ensuring that those are reviewed. I think there is a need, in my opinion, to broaden that as well into our wider view around locality working. There are a number of different initiatives across the organisation where we interact with communities, and now is, following 2 years after vesting day, now is our opportunity to reflect that, to ensure that it's fit for purpose. It goes to your point, Councillor Johnson, around ensuring that officers and members are able to support their local communities and how they develop. There is a wide range of interactions with our community, so I think putting all those tools in the right toolbox is going to be quite key. In terms of the duplication of effort, I'll have to kind of take that one away. Or actually, Sarah's in the room, so Sarah can help kind of answer that one. But it was part of the key points around not only listening to the feedback from you as members, but the peers reflected that feedback. So this is very much a reflection of the feedback that they heard that week. There was a need to review those local community networks to ensure that they were clear and their purpose was focused, given some of the points that were raised during that week and been raised since. But so I don't know whether Sarah, Chair, wants to kind of cover that point.
Officer Scoden.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the issues raised. I think it's incredibly helpful. Some members may recall that we always committed to do a full review of local community networks within 2 years of their inception, and we had that on the plan. Equally, on the audit plan for some time has been the swap audit of LCNs. It's not, in my mind, duplication. It won't be duplication. We don't have the resources to duplicate. It's a case of that will be informing some of the review that we intend to do. But as Alan said, we need to look, we think, holistically at everything this council does, its relationship with its communities. Things have changed significantly in our internal and external world since vesting day. Are we still looking at things in the right way? Are we supporting members, as Dawn has said? Do we have the buy-in and the capacity from our colleagues? So this is going to involve staff as well as members and other stakeholders. So at the moment, working with Sarah and her colleagues really to formulate what those actions will actually look like. And my personal request would be that this scrutiny, perhaps others, key stakeholder in that review, because in a way, it's been that continuation. I know it was LGR scrutiny before, but a number of members here have been part of that journey and know what does and doesn't work through their experience. So in a way, where we are at the moment is, yes, we need to look at LCNs, but they're a vehicle, they're just one vehicle. And if things need to change as a result of the review, we can look at that as well. But I'd rather get that really rounded view. The other thing about SWAP to mention that is being helpful is that they are doing the legwork to find out what's happening elsewhere in the country. So we will have some clear comparators. I know there's an element of apples and pears because each locality will do things slightly different, but there's something around, hate to go back to Councillor Trimnell's point, there's something about where we're pitching those roles. No, I don't. Just because you mentioned about, sorry, about salary pressures but you know, if we compare, we've got to look at all of those things. It's quite a demanding role being out there and being the first point of contact for communities. I think obviously you know because of the experience with Exmoor. So are our job descriptions fit for purpose? Is that why we're losing a few members of staff? You know, I'm not saying we need to pay people more, but it's part of the mix of looking at what we're actually trying to achieve and how we recognise that appropriately. So I think there's a number of themes triangulating, a bit like Councillation said about, you know, the different reports. There's something here about what is our relationship with our communities? What do we want it to be? How does it help us achieve our objectives? How does it help communities achieve their objectives? And what can we do in the capacity that we've got?
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. Our next speaker is Councillor Hobhouse, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't disagree more. What was Dawn was talking about is that you brief all the parish councils every 2 weeks, or they have the chance to be briefed. To start with, none of the members got told any of the information that you were giving to the parish clerks. So us of members who attend their parish councils arrived to be told that actually they didn't know what they were talking about because the parish clerk had been pre-briefed by the council. And it makes life extremely difficult for a member, especially one who has 14 parish councils and 2 parish meetings to deal with, to find that he doesn't know what's going on in his own division. My feelings about the connections on the LCNs and how they are handing out information, they work, and the chairman on my right knows this very well, on top of Exmoor. I have, as I've already said, 14 parish councils, of which 5 are supposed to be in Yeovil. They have refused to attend the Yeovil meeting because, quite rightly, it is Yeovil eccentric and they don't want to be in that one. So they've asked to join over 18 months ago in with Southwest, Southeast in Wincanton. None of that has been carried out. None of it's been looked into as to why the number of people attending Wincanton, which was extremely successful when it was a trial unit in the first place, and put in a lot of work on producing youth workers between the major towns. And it's done nothing since. And I find it quite difficult that we're spending somewhere between £500,000 and £750,000 out of the public health budget on something which is not public health, in my opinion, and is not achieving any liaison with my rural parish councils. And I know this is not it is a personal view, but there are others who have this problem as well, in particular people who are representing rural areas outside of Exmoor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobhouse. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. I must admit, I thought, again, interesting report, and certainly the feedback from the team was interesting, and I guess it's their job to some extent to raise questions rather than give us any answers. But I just wonder, some of them felt a little bit motherhood and apple pie stuff, which is difficult when we're in the situation we're in, when we're working so hard to take forward an authority that's under pressure. And some of them was, oh, well, if you've got all the resources in the world, it would be very easy to deal with this, but we haven't got that. So we need to work out ways that we can deal with this. And that's where I think we need the support. And maybe when they come back, they'll give us more support rather than just pointing out no, that's what I was going to say. Questions I wanted to raise, though, couple were a little concerning to me. On page 47, their report under finance asked us to revisit the evaluation, the methodology of the divestment of assets, implying that we're not taking into account the wider range of impact that those assets have when they're sold, which I find surprising, bearing in mind the discussions I've heard at the various subcommittee meetings that look into the disposal of commercial assets. They do seem to take those into account, and I just wondered why that factor seemed to be not registered by our team, what information it was that came back from them that implied that we weren't doing that work. On page 53, there's a reference to a more robust approach to priority setting, how we can target resources more appropriately. Again, it's something that it's in the normal daily routine of a council to be doing that, and I just wonder where they feel that we're not doing that, because that's something that I think would be very useful to understand why they think we're not doing that, and particularly their reference there, and it comes up again later, to opportunities to influence for a wider group of members. and where they feel we're not engaging the membership. That comes up again later in there's a rather worrying reference they make to a membership relationship imbalance between officers and members, which again, I didn't quite understand what is it they're getting at, and can we be a bit more explicit in what the problem is so we know how we can address that, because it's not something that I've felt from being within the council, and maybe it's something I'm just not noticing, that what is it that we're missing that we need to be aware of, because if there are those imbalances, that is important that we get to the bottom of that. And the final question again comes back to resources. Page 58 asks us to have a much more robust growth strategy. Are we in a position, do we feel, have we got the resources to be able to take that forward? Because as we've all said, growth within Somerset is going to be key to this authority having the income that can help us with all those costs that we know that we've got coming down the track. So have we got the resources to put that in place and actually deliver on the questions that they've raised?
Thank you very much, Councillor Filmer. Officer Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Filmer, for the questions. In terms of the, I'll do them in order if that's okay. So your point, your words, don't mind, but I do understand the point. The motherhood and apple pie elements of the report, if you will. I think it's fair to say that we asked for, and it was advised to us, that we should have a very standard corporate peer review. So we had something that was comparable. There was no particular focus. There was no area of search that was unique to us, so that we were comparable. We had that opportunity to look at the, if you like, the basics of an organisation. And some of it, of course, you're absolutely right. You would look at this as both members, as senior officers and junior officers, and look and say, well, that's obvious, isn't it? You do need a council plan. You do need these things. And some of those things we already have. But what was very clear, I think, from the peer review feedback is the level of which that has been embedded in the organisation, as to be anticipated with such a new organisation. And we forget, I certainly forget sometimes, that we're only 2 years old, or almost 2 years old. So I think it was just a reminder of that, because of the range of interviews that they had had, the nature and some of the interactions that they had had, and that was one of the bits of feedback that was there. So some of these things, you're absolutely right. I certainly read this report and said, well, of course, that's an obvious statement. Of course, you need to link your strategy and your actions, and then making sure you're prioritising those. That's obvious. But clearly the link for everybody that they interviewed hasn't been made. So part of that process is, how do we make those links more explicit and more clear? And how do we go through that process where anybody within reason can ask that question of, well, how do you prioritise those activities within the organisation, so we can provide that narrative? In terms of the commercial assets point, this was a particular point that was raised by, as Councillor Lachon has mentioned, we benefited from really top flight peers. They were picked not by us but by the LGA, based upon the brief of, we want to basically have pseudo commissioners come in, and actually some of them are real commissioners just elsewhere, thankfully. And as a result of that, I think we have that opportunity to really gain some of their experience of those councils that have already gone through that significant intervention. And one of the bits of feedback that was had was around making sure that when we're going through the process of asset sales, we're really clear to decision makers as we go through that process what we're doing with the residual debt. Are we considering it? Where is that sat? And what are the benefits or otherwise of either retaining that debt or paying that debt back? And what would be then the consequences of then borrowing new funding as part of that process? That's actually something that was narrated very clearly by Maria Christofi, our Section 151, through the budget setting process. But again, it's an opportunity to ensure that when committees are considering, when decision makers are considering the sale of assets, there is a full understanding of having a better data set in front of them. So not necessarily the strategy change that they were recommending, although that clearly is something that we need to keep under constant review, actually moreover about how do we report more accurate information. In terms of the member and officer relationships, again, their point, their observation, and it's a case of how do we make sure that that's kind of built into the process. There's definitely that need as we go through the normal priority setting process to ensure that we move past the financial emergency and start to think around those standard things that you would do as an organisation, business planning, improvement planning, all those sorts of activities. But they'd certainly fed back that they had witnessed a significant impact as a result of our focus on delivery of BAU services, but also the focus on the financial emergency and the level of capacity that took out of the organisation as a result. I think what they did say is that they didn't see or no concerns were raised with them around the delivery of services as a result. So those frontline services that are being delivered, that the performance hadn't been negatively impacted. Whether it improved to a standard where all members were happy and the community were happy was a different matter. But that was something that they were complimentary about, that they hadn't seen that drop, but there was a need to kind of improve it. I think that member officer relationship point is just for one for debate, and I think it goes to Councillor Johnson's point about how do we improve that. And then that's the final point around that I would just say around council strategy. Clearly, we've had that strategy around, particularly that focus around financial emergency. They were really clear in their feedback, and I think Councillor Lashon was in the room when they provided it to us, which is, yes, we know you've got a financial emergency, but so is everybody else. And how are you going to be able to do that and respond to that, as well as dealing with your council strategy, that future development plan, and to your point around growth strategy, how do we use the tools that we've got in our toolbox in Somerset? How do we use some of the things that are happening in Somerset in order to ensure that we've got that ability to really locate a growth plan that we can resource adequately? Largely, that's going to be focused on some of those big developments, and that's where I think the action plan needs to feature. But rather than a strategy in blissful isolation of the level of resources or the actual activity on the ground, I think that's the recommendation they were trying to make is, so what's your key focus? Not what you're doing everything, what's your key focus? But the point's really well made. Thank you.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ashton is the last councillor I've seen indicate in the room, and then we'll go to some of the online requests.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to underline what Councillor Hophouse said about the LCNs. In my LCN, we have the small parish councils just walking away because they don't feel they have a voice. They're being drowned out by the two large towns and their interests, which don't align with the small parish council interests. And I think something dramatic has to be changed there to actually bring them back. Otherwise, they'll just lost. They don't have the time to engage with something which is of no benefit to them at all. So it's completely different here. On 323, page 37, it says empowering staff by possibly lifting some internal control measures. An audit, I think we were particularly concerned about internal waivers which were repeated, especially where they're on timing. And so we want to make sure there's an exception for the waiver process, and the waiver process is actually tightened up, because it does appear that the waiver process is used liberally, more liberally than it should be. And it should be counted as breaches in some of those cases, especially when you have a waiver followed by a waiver for the same reasons over and over again, which was identified in audit 6 months ago or so.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ashton. Actually, Councillor Smedley, you wanted to comment, and you are in the room, so I will call you now.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to miss the opportunity to lay in the boot to the LCNs here, because I think it's quite important to note the content of this report, where it says, particularly it says they're the primary vehicle for consulting the local communities. Well, they're not, are they? The town and parish councils are, and they duplicate and undermine the work of those. And we've long felt that, and I think this is a feeling that's going around the county a bit more. I think the whole idea of further development of the LCNs has to include the opportunity of scrapping the LCNs. I'm sorry.
Come back to that one in a moment, if we may. I've got Councillor Redman online. Lee?
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. If you hear any background, I'm granddad duties at the moment, but so I'll apologise if he makes a noise. But just three quick points. Councillor Smedley picked up one, but I'll start in order. Just to pick Mr. Jones up a little bit. When he talked about a moment ago about financial emergencies, and I think he said something along the line as everyone's got one. I disagree. Not all councils have a financial emergency, but there are a large number that are in trouble at the moment. I talked specifically about 3.3.2, where it talks about scrutiny. And again, I'll pick up the words in the room. The conversation was about I think Bob made reference to apple pies and stuff. Whether I think a peer review is to provide feedback, but not direction. It's up to us to choose how we go through. But the the point under 3.3.2, just pick the moment he decided to zoom the cars past me, so I'll apologise again. Consider streamlining scrutiny panels. I'm sorry, streamlining is a direction, not it should have been worded more dramatic. You may want to carry out review, which we'd already committed to do. So that's that one. I don't like the word streamlining because that's telling us a direction of travel expectation. I don't think we've got enough too many scrutiny committees. I don't think we have enough time to scrutinise things. So there's a difference there. 3.3.4 is the LCN review. I support Councillor Smedley's comments. Not all LCNs are working, and more to the point, there's a lot of LCNs that struggle to understand a purpose. Until they get given some teeth or some power to do things, then there's a negative point there to do. Just one final point, 3.5.1, member and officer leadership, promote better, greater member interaction and development. Speaking as a chair of a scrutiny committee that struggles sometimes to get people bums on seats. We've got 110 councillors. Forgive me, I don't mean to speak out of line, but not all of them want to be involved with committees and stuff. I think we need to find a way to get more members involved in the day-to-day business of what councils do, and that will mean that we have better debate, better product, and members will understand better what's going on. Off of soapbox. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Redmond. I don't see any other member in the room wanting to speak. My voice is obviously so good you're hearing it twice. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair.
He's got
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points in terms of, and my apologies if I misled the committee in my words around financial urgency. They weren't my words, they were the words of the lead peer. That's exactly what the words that were said in terms of local government is in a constant financial crisis was the context of that, but I completely understand how that could be taken out of context, my slightly poor articulation of that. In terms of the particular points, scrutiny, obviously we're going through that review next, but I want to be really clear that it was one of the key bits of feedback from the members of the peer team that they believe that streamlining was appropriate based upon their experiences from other councils, but it's us to respond to it as a council. It's you to advise on that from a scrutiny perspective, and ultimately the executive to approve the action plan moving forward. It was an observation that they set out, so it's nothing more than that we do not influence that. It's simply an element of, as a result of the feedback and conversations that were had as part of that process. I think the points around LCNs has already been made. And just in terms of that member and officer leadership point, I think we've already made that point around making sure we've got that interaction right and appropriate. But again, any feedback or views around that particular point, we can take away at scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Jones. So just to pull together some of those threads, I think broadly speaking, the areas that you will be looking at in putting together the recommendations for the executive pretty well established here. However, picking up some of the comments that have been made this afternoon, noting what Councillor Sieber said about a finance and performance system will empower staff and councillors. So particularly, I think, in relation to 3.2. Obviously, 3.3.2 governance and the scrutinising of scrutiny is something that we will be considering ourselves later. And I suspect that part of what we will be considering will in turn inform the action plan. I think there will be some cross-fertilisation between the two streams that will emerge over the course of the next few weeks. 3.3.4, obviously the LCNs are of continuing interest, and I think we probably have reached a stage now in this council's term where they do need to be reviewed. Clearly there is a range of, let's try to make them work better, going up to or down to let's scrap them altogether. All of these things do need to be part of that discussion. But I think I'm hearing in this forum that there is a degree of expertise that needs to be tapped into right the way across the authority. So in putting together the action plan, I do think that there is experience that needs to be drawn on, particularly from those members of council who are chairs of LCNs, and perhaps some of those where the LCNs are working really quite well, in our view, at any rate.
Those, Mr. Chairman.
Well, yeah, plural. So if I make that point, and then 3.5, I think 3.5.1.2 and 0.3, I think there's a degree of nonplusness on the part of members. They're not absolutely sure what's being driven out there, but if there are issues, they're ones that need to be explored in the round, and all of those things that are mentioned in 3.5 need to be drawn out rather than just the item that's noted in the recommendations before us today, I think. Is there anything else that members wish to add to that resume? Cover it happily for you, that's all? Right, so you're happy that we send those recommendations forward to the executive? All those in favour? Any against? Right, pass nem con. Thank you very much. Okay. So that brings us to item 6, which is review of the council scrutiny function and arrangements. So this takes us to page 85 in the council pack for today, the agenda pack for today. And I will invite Officer Wooldridge, please, to lead us through this report.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This obviously follows on from the previous agenda item, where you'll notice there was a specific action relating to a review of the council's scrutiny arrangements. I think it's important, and I know sometimes there can be some nuances, but it's important to highlight that this report is talking about a review of the council's scrutiny function and the scrutiny arrangements. Sometimes there is a focus straight on the arrangements, which is the manner in which the council discharges its function. I think the key part of the review is just to highlight the function is a very fundamental part as well of how the council seeks to deliver its scrutiny duties. So there's a classic form in organisational design, which talks about form, i.e. arrangements, follow function. So you need to be clear on what you are trying to achieve and then look at how you appropriately design and resource the delivery of that in order to meet your objectives. So I just wanted to flag that the review is not just looking at the fact that the council currently has 5 scrutiny committees and does it want to change that. Those are just the arrangements. It's the function that's an important part of this review. The other part you'll see referenced throughout the report is, as part of the proposed approach, clearly we have the benefit of the corporate peer challenge report, but we're also keen to also get under the hood a bit more in terms of understanding where there could be potential areas for improvement, and therefore we are recommending that as part of a scrutiny review, we do that in partnership with a body known as the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, which are a national body that work with the LGA and work with councils looking at the effectiveness of scrutiny arrangements and where there could be areas for improvement. So we're proposing that as part of this review as, in effect, a body that would add value and bring their expertise to support our members' views around particularly how do we compare with our goal of good scrutiny with other peer councils? How do we compare to what we set out in our constitution with the scrutiny terms of reference? So again, just to flag the part of the review that you'll see in the report is highlighting that we do that in partnership with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, who again have got expertise in looking at other peer councils, which we think would be valuable in supporting us with this work. So just taking you through some of the key points in the report. I'm trying not to replicate some of the debate and discussion that's already been had under the previous item, but again, you'll see on page 87 the importance of good scrutiny, not just that it's a statutory requirement, but again, how good scrutiny can add value to an organisation. You'll then also see reference to, and many of you will know already, that the council has already undertaken a review of scrutiny almost 12 months ago. That was principally in response to that commitment of within 12 months of vesting day to review the council scrutiny arrangements, and a number of recommendations were brought to full council at the annual general meeting last May. And a number of those have already been implemented, but several of those are still underway. I think as Councillor Redmond referenced, the chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny committees recognise the importance of keeping the scrutiny arrangements under regular review. So again, there's been that commitment, regardless of the corporate peer challenge report, to make sure that our scrutiny arrangements and our function is meeting what we expect it to do. And if not, what potential areas of improvement there could be. So on page 89, again, you'll see reference to the statutory guidance, and particularly the 4 principles of good scrutiny. Again, these are very much the foundations of how we will assess our current scrutiny function and our current scrutiny arrangements. I think the key bits for me, other than drawing out that general approach, is clearly the member involvement, the member oversight, and clearly tapping into that experience and knowledge that members clearly can bring, which is a valuable part of our scrutiny function. So to that end, you'll see in Appendix A, there's a terms of reference for a member oversight group, particularly to work with officers and to work with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. Hopefully you'll see within that there is a key part of that review is intended to be a survey of members, again, to ensure that we capture and provide opportunities for all members to have a contribution on how they see our current scrutiny arrangement and where they believe there could be areas for improvement. I think that's an important part. We've had the benefit of the peer challenge. We will have the benefit of the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, but I think it's also providing where are we also taking stock of our own councillors' views and what they believe is our scrutiny function and arrangements. So that's a key part of that review. Clearly, the review and the approach will result in a series of a report, a findings, effectively a sort of an assessment in some ways. Think of it almost as an MOT of the council's scrutiny function and arrangements, and that will then come back to this committee for this committee to receive those findings and any recommendations. And then subject to this committee's receipt and review of that, this committee may then choose if there are any proposed changes to either the function within the terms of reference in the Constitution or the arrangements. The committee may then choose to make recommendations to full council, because any changes to the council's constitution or the arrangements of the committees are reserved to full council only. So again, just to flag in terms of that direction of what a review may result in, still would require member sign off and support here, and then any fundamental changes to our constitution or committee arrangements would have to go to full council for all members then to consider and vote upon. The only thing I would draw out is recommendation 2. You'll note in terms of the membership of that working group, and Appendix A sets out a proposed working group membership of 10 councillors, and that not all of those councillors are made up of the current chairs and vice chairs of all the committees. Again, we wanted a breadth of membership to bring various insights. And again, depending on the committee's debate and whether we have 10 names today to propose as part of that membership. I would just flag if we don't, just a suggested amendment, if that's the case, to delegate authority to the monitoring officer to confirm the membership in consultation with the chair of this committee if we are not able to provide those 10 names today.
Right, thank you. I'll revert to that in a moment, if I may. Thank you, Officer Wooldridge. Our first member to speak is Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. First, to poke my head above the parapet, no doubt. I think it's a good report. I think it's probably overdue. And I think the recommendations and reports are very much in the line that I would hope they would be. I agree completely with your point that form follows function, and the function that we've missed, and we haven't always missed it, we've sort of stuttered. Sometimes we get policy that's well developed through scrutiny, actually adding value to a nascent policy and turning it into something which is worthwhile. The council tax reduction scheme, I'd say, was a very good example. It built on, there were certainly two previous councils had very much common themes with the initial proposals when we took on council tax support. And the development of the council tax support policy was done through scrutiny on a cross-party basis. And as a result, it sailed through full council. And compare and contrast with a certain recent parking strategy, where it was all done behind the scenes, very much in a decide, announce, deliver way, and nobody had actually agreed what was trying to be achieved. And that was very clearly a policy which, had I been there, I would have pushed straight to scrutiny at a very early stage in order to develop the why we're doing it, to the point where everybody had agreed and there was a consensus on why it needed doing, consensus on how it should be done, and then the detail of the individual implementation would then be consultation with individual areas on individual parking TROs. So it strikes me as, you know, we don't always miss the target, but when we do, it causes us real pain. And of course, that particular real pain was felt in the run into a budget, which is where our attention should really have been. And equally, I'm not completely convinced that that a wider approach wouldn't help solve some of our problems with bigger spend departments. I know there is a lot of work to fit the expenditure to the current framework, but I'm not convinced that I see the footprint of scrutiny in guiding the detail of why things are being done, and the value judgments of it. So I completely buy the pitch. It is form follows function, and we should actually be having task and finish groups. One thing I would say, though, which I don't see in the paper, is in my experience, having led really awkward and difficult task and finish in the past, writing it up is something that really needs a bit of scrutiny officer support. I mean, I think to the extent of, I think really it's co-authorship between the chair of the task and finish group and the officer. Frankly, you want the officer to write it because he wants it in English without spelling mistakes in the record. But it's also a very good way of making sure that no valid point gets left behind as well. So I'm really very happy with the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seeb. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I fully support the comments Peter's just made, and for me, you know, when scrutiny works, it works really well. When it is not, when it hasn't had the due process or the time to follow through the due process, that's when things can go wrong for the council in terms of the backlash and what have you. You know, scrutiny there is to make fully formed decisions. That's the purpose, so that everything that gets decided has been carefully thought through. And for me, a lot of that does come back to the timing of what comes to scrutiny when. And I think we really need to do some work on that. I understand the pressures sometimes can be quite short to get something through an appropriate scrutiny before it can get to executive, but I think much more work needs to be done to ensure that wherever possible, enough time is given for policies, changes, anything coming forward to have had the appropriate level of scrutiny. So for me, there's a lot of work to do on the timing of how reports come to the scrutiny committees. I'm a bit concerned about that being done by the end of April, given we've got 2 weeks of Easter. Are you confident that you can deliver this by the end of April? Because it says from mid-March to the end of April, we're now towards the end of March. So yeah, that's slightly, seeking reassurance that you feel that's achievable by the end of April. When it comes to the 10 members of that task group, I saw it was limited to those on the scrutiny committees. I'm just not quite sure why that needs to be limited to the scrutiny committees, in that there's a lot of people who aren't on those committees who do substitute for people and may have valid experiences from when they do step in to work with a scrutiny committee. So I just wonder why that's limited to scrutiny committee members. Yes, they've probably got the most experience, but there might be something to be gained by having one person who sits outside scrutiny, but regularly supports them.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hobhouse. Oh, sorry, did you want to come back in? Sorry, Officer Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. Again, I suppose just to highlight that it's only in terms of the timescales. I would describe them as ambitious. Using my MOT analogy, then clearly, depending on the state of the car in question, if you use that analogy, that would determine how fast you can work through that review. I think the key will be, again, that involvement with our partners, the involvement of members, the commissioning of that working group, and that analysis of the evidence. So I would say that is the earliest it would be done. However, there is a risk that the review may miss that timescale by up to several weeks, and in which case it would mean the report and findings would still come to this committee, but it would miss the council's annual general meeting because that's on the 21st of May. So if the review is not complete by the end of April, then it will not be in time for the annual general meeting, but it would just mean that the review and findings would have to go to a subsequent council meeting. I think the only other point I would pick up, and it's perhaps some terminology that's referenced a lot in different types of reports. I think there's a common theme in part, which is around, and it's an organisational theme, which is about where you are faced with multiple challenges in multiple areas, the key point being the need to prioritise and focus. And I think there's a theme throughout for the review to consider, which is the extent to which scrutiny is able and is supported in being able to prioritise its areas of focus, particularly for such a large council with an extensive range of services. There is only so much that scrutiny can do within its available capacity. So I think there is something for the review to look at. Some words would use, I know there's been reference to words like streamline. Streamline is also a reference towards how you prioritise, how you focus. It doesn't automatically mean reduce something. It can also mean about how you focus in terms of that. So I think there's something as part of the review to consider forward plans and prioritisation.
Okay. Both Councillor Seeb and Councillor Johnson wish to come back, having heard what Scott has just said. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I just I have a little bit of a worry in any organisation which looks a bit stovepiped at the moment but is trying to fix it, at creating a scrutiny that is effectively executive member and director centric in its creation of task and finish. without recognising that there are some themes which run laterally. So in an earlier part of the meeting, we were debating the peer review, which had brought up the cohering of information. And I think that's a great example where actually being able to step outside of the corporate framework and look at it corporately, and we are the corporate scrutiny after all, for things such as systems of record, bringing together legacy planning systems, but actually thinking about it from the framework of if the council as a whole needs to function, then there are elements of that work that need to be part of, for example, performance management and financial control. There are interactions with those systems that need to be seen instantly further up the tree. It just strikes me that we might struggle a wee bit if we don't recognise that. But equally, I was reassured that the report does say, in the end, it'll be the scrutiny committee that decides. And I just think we should highlight that that is something we would do, but don't be afraid of it, because actually it's potentially a good thing in fixing the stovepipe and creating a single cohesive team, which is where we all want to go.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of explain some of the topics that come forward at scrutiny. I mean, I think because we have been a new unitary, a lot of the requests have been information seeking requests for things to come to scrutiny, and I'm imagining that will settle down as people now are much more familiar with areas of the council that perhaps they've had no experience of before. So I think going forward, it can become something which is literally scrutinising the policies, the matters that are being brought for decision. So I think I'm reassured that the agendas may shift as we go forward to literally be less about information gathering exercises and more to actually scrutiny of policy.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Scott.
Again, just to echo, I think just some of the, and amplify some of the points Councillor Johnson's just made, that the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny will particularly point to, as do the statutory guidance around overview and scrutiny, they focus on impact. So what has been the impact as a result? And that's particularly an area around prioritisation and focus. You will heard it also referred to as adding value and other similar phrases, but there is something as part of review, which is what impact, and I think Councillor C pointed to in particular. One of the areas when you look at a scrutiny function will be around, and the clues in part, the two parts, which is overview and scrutiny. Scrutiny very much holding decision makers to account. Overview focused on policy development and service improvement. Part of the review will look to the extent to which scrutiny is receiving reports that are effectively going onward to exec versus early involvement in policy development and service improvement, and the balance of that. I think just to bring out some of the points that both councillors made.
Can I just say, picking up the timescale issue, my personal view would be that this is a very important issue to get right, and it would be better to take slightly longer and make sure that it was right rather than try to rush to hit a relatively artificial deadline. I would hope members would agree that it needs to take as long as it needs to take. Yes? Peter?
Chairman, I'd just point out that the authority benefits from having had 5 prior authorities, and there is a substantial overlap in both the member and the officer body between the old councils and the new. And we're not treading any brand new ground here. This is well proven, as those who read the case studies from having had the review in other councils, and I recognise what's in the recommendations. So I'm not nervous about pressing forward. I agree it has to be right. I'm saying we're starting with a decent foundation.
Right, I'm going to let Councillor Johnson whip in very, very briefly.
just a very quick check, and apologies for coming back and back. It is one of my traits. I just want to check, are we doing any public consultation with this? Because there are members who regularly attend scrutiny, members of the public who regularly attend scrutiny meetings. And I do think it would be helpful to get some input from members of the public who regularly like to contribute to those meetings.
We weren't intending to get any direct public consultation undertaken as part of this. Our focus is principally being in terms of member consultation and member survey. But if you think that is something that you'd ask the working group to consider and how best for that to be undertaken, that might be something we could explore. It wasn't intended.
But let's just add that to the consideration. Perhaps it may not be appropriate. It may be something actually that when it comes forward to this committee, wherever, we actually encourage the public participation at that stage. But it can be part of the consideration of the task and finish group. I'm going to ask Councillor Butt-Philip to come in here, if I may. Theo.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to respond to something that Councillor Johnson said, although I think some of it has now been covered by Scott, which is just about the various functions that we want from scrutiny. And Councillor Johnson talked about the information gathering, and I agree that the newer the authority is, the more you're likely to see of that. And looking forward to the scrutinising of decisions that were going to be made. But I did just want to highlight, and I think this will be really useful. I'm glad in the recommendations that it talks about seeking input from the executive and executive directors as well, because I think one of the things that will be incredibly valuable to the entire organisation to be an output from the scrutiny function is around that whole policy development work and actually scrutinising, not just reactively scrutinising decisions that we are making, but actually looking particularly at things like the council plan and elements of it and areas that we know are of concern to the people of Somerset, and saying, okay, what are we as an organisation doing about these things, and what do we want to proactively, what do you, scrutiny, want to proactively encourage us, the executive, to address?
Yeah. Very good point. Thank you very much. So to extend the MOT analysis, we move to the Rolls-Royce of members. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to talk about myself and Dave Mansell's experiences on the Climate and Place Scrutiny Committee. I'll start off by saying there's almost no time, no effort to engage with members putting forward their opinions. We had a very good task and finish group on electricity and generation. We had no feedback going back into the system for over 8 months. I don't think it's been to executive yet. I may be wrong and I'm willing to be corrected. Has it been to executive? No. Okay, that's my point. On top of which, senior officers have fought the Climate and Change Committee on nutrient neutrality, and I'm not going to go into it in depth because it's boring everybody no end. But thank you, Theo. The situation is that the input of members is extremely difficult, because the committees don't meet often enough to enable members to be able to develop policy because they don't have enough time. And on almost everything, I'm quite happy for the chairman to correct me again, on almost all the previous chairman, on almost every single agenda setting committee, you are actually trying to cut the amount of papers that come to both the committees that I sit on as a vice chairman, and the amount of time or input that members can make is very seriously restricted. And I think it's very important, excuse me, that this review actually asks the question about why so many chairmen are having to sign off papers, because there aren't time for them to go to scrutiny before they have to go to executive. and why there is so few and so little task and finish groups put forward by members on subjects that interest them or bore them, as in my case, with phosphates, because it really isn't time or the place for members to be involved at the moment.
Thank you. That's very pertinent. I've got Councillor Filmer next.
Thank you. I mean, much of what I was going to say was being said across the other side of the room anyway. I mean, I think it is critical that we get to the point where we are dealing more with feeding into the process rather than reporting on what has already happened. And I think that is something that would be useful. I think sometimes there is a danger that scrutiny is seen as a hurdle to get over rather than something that can actually feed and be helpful. And I think genuinely, as was mentioned earlier with the example that was given in terms of the parking, and then the previous one with the rates. It showed how you can have a cross-party working group within in effect one of these committees, and I think that does help us get through avoiding issues that otherwise can be a problem. So I think we also, need to do a slightly better job of selling scrutiny to our fellow councillors. I mean, I've had it referred to me by a number of members who, we don't want to do scrutiny because it's like watching paint dry. It's where you learn about the council. It's where you find out how the council works. And I think it's one of the most beneficial committees that people can actually be on. But it is interesting that and it's no criticism, but there are some members on this committee as subs who have a better attendance record than some of the members of the committee, which is unfortunate. So I think it's important that we do see that engagement from members and officers to understand that, as I say, we're here to be, as I think the comment was made, we're supposed to be a critical friend. And I think we can be just that. We don't have to just be difficult. And I think genuinely, most of the scrutiny committees do try and be helpful in their comments that they make. They're not just made to be difficult. So I think there is that slight education amongst, as I say, our colleagues as well as to the role that we're feeding into. Very much support the whole process of having a look at this. I'm relieved to hear the comment made about it's better that we take a little bit longer to get this right than just get it through by a date. I think that is important because sometimes, and it's the comment that Henry's just made, it feels sometimes that we're trying to shove a whole load of stuff through a set timetable rather than necessarily working out what it is we need to do. We on this committee fought quite hard to keep them to go with the 4 weekly meetings because we felt we needed to have that time to scrutinise, and we saw at the meeting that finished 9 on 6 o'clock when you put that amount of stuff on an agenda, by the time you get to the end of it, we've lost that scrutiny in those last couple of items because everyone's feeling drained and unable to work on that. So I think we do need to review how we're working, but I do think, as I say, we should be seen as scrutiny as a positive part of the process, not just a stick with which to beat the executive over the head with, because I don't think that's part of what our role is.
Thank you very much, Councillor Filmer. Councillor Trimnell.
To be fair, most of what I was going to say has been said. In fact, Councillor Filmer has said quite a lot of it. I have had people say to me they don't particularly want to speak up at scrutiny because they don't want to. The critical side of things is sometimes off-putting. I know there was somebody who said, what is scrutiny when we first started? What are you supposed to do? How is it supposed to run? And I wonder whether that should be explained better. I think it's a really good idea to do some sort of survey of councillors to understand what people think about scrutiny. I have been to scrutiny meetings where people come, they sit there, and then they leave at the end and they haven't said anything. And I'd love to sort of understand, maybe people are uncomfortable about speaking or don't know what they're supposed to say. But I think it'd be really important to find out. I would be interested in taking part in this, but you've got a lot of interest as well, I see up there. So I don't know how you'll decide who's on it, but expressions of interest and things, I guess, will be put out at some point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trimble. Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to speak? If not, I'm going to ask Councillor Slocum to speak. And can I say, Jill, how pleasant it is to see you with us this afternoon, and hope that your recovery is continuing apace. Jill.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, so apologies. It said you couldn't. Yes, thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm getting back slowly, trying to do this way first. So thank you very much. I think I agree with absolutely everything that Councillor Filmer said. He speaks always very eloquent. And but before we get to the function, going by Scott's, I would like to talk about the foundation. And I know I'm really late to the party because I know this has been discussed, but I just need to be given this opportunity. You're proposing to undertake this review of the scrutiny function with the 4 other scrutinies, and you're saying you're supported. It'll be supported by officers, and I'm quite surprised to see the funding that's required for it. And I know that will be ongoing with the LGA, but it's still a lot of money. The thing that worries me greatly with all of our scrutinies, and I think ours has been really a really good one, it's the officer support. The officer support that has made adults and health so good. It's because of the democratic services and the specialist officer support at those meetings. They have worked tirelessly with me, and helped Claire, who's been standing in while I've not been there. I know there's been a streamlining. I know we've got to find money, but I honestly say that this really concerns me, that I worked alongside an officer who gave 300% of herself to ensure that I had every bit of information. People were ready, people were available. And to run a good scrutiny, we have to have officers' support. We cannot function without democratic services. They are the backbone of the council. And I believe strongly that we are losing the very people that are fundamental to us doing a superb job. So I just needed to mention that, really. I think it's been very sad that I know when I come back, I won't have that officer support, and that really worries me. And I'm sure it will worry other members as well. I'm obviously interested in being on the group as well as the chair, but that may not be so, especially if it can be electronic. But I just wanted to bring these items up, please, because to have a review is costing. I understand why we perhaps need to go through it, but I think the fundamental thing is our officer support. I mean, can I just say my last thing is that Jamie, and I will say this, may look like Superman, but he's not. And I think we can't expect certain officers to be able to run so fast and try to get everything done for us. We need officer support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for my ramblings. Thank you.
Jill, it's a pleasure to hear your ramblings again. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to speak? Anybody else online that wishes to speak? Well, look, we've got the recommendations before us, and I'm assuming that what we've heard this afternoon in terms of the proposed approach, item 1 of the recommendations, you're happy with. Item 2, the draft terms of reference, which are really is Appendix 1. And page 99 is the bit that refers to the membership. Now, if we're not going to do this by virtue of office, if we're not going to say it's the chairs and vice chairs of each committee, and we therefore need to get expressions of interest from members, and really to make sure that there is coverage from all 5 scrutiny committees, I think we're going to have to go out and ask members to express their interest. Are you happy to delegate to me and to Officer Wooldridge selecting the 10? Would that be all right? Councillor Trimnell.
I am, and I totally agree with Councillor Johnson that, you know, it shouldn't necessarily be restricted to people who are already on scrutiny, but I think there needs to be a balance, because I think the people who are on scrutiny are the people who have a better oversight as to what happens. So that's the only word of caution I'd express. If we ended up with sort of up those 10 people, sort of 3 or 4 of them who aren't on scrutiny and haven't done scrutiny, that might not work so well. But that's not just to squeeze room in for myself, because if I'm not on it, it's not the end of the world. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
But if you're happy, then that be delegated to us to make those decisions. If you're happy with that, right? So with that, may I see all those in? Would anyone care to propose the recommendations? Yes. Right. Thank you, seconded by Councillor Seave. May I see all those in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. That's passed an MCOM. Thank you very much. So we will then, if we may, take a 5-minute comfort break. So we'll be back at 20 to 4, and then we'll consider item 7. Thank you.
Wrist out, get them slapped.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we are reassembling. Thank you, and we move to item number 7. And this is going to be introduced by Councillor Leishan. I'm channeling my inner Welsh person there. And she will invite, following that, Officer Nicola Hicks to present the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just introduce this very briefly by saying that you'll see that this is an improved position again since Q3, month 9. And I'm really pleased to see that because, of course, every time things look a bit better, there is a lesser drawdown on the MTFP reserve with which we set the budget. That does depend on MHCLG agreeing that our capitalisation directive for this year remains at its original ask figure, so that enables us to reduce the drawdown on reserves. So because we don't know the final figure for capitalisation directive on any year until we get to the outturn, and that is the bit that has confused people a great deal for 24-25 and again for 25-26. And that again is compounded, I'd say, by the fact that we don't know the cost of all the redundancies until we're completely through the restructure. And I know from my own experience that the cost of a redundancy can literally change from day to day and week to week because of that calculation done by Peninsula Pensions on the pension strain, where people are retiring early but over the age of 55. So this is really good news. What I'll be really interested to see when we get to the month 11 report, which Maria Christofi tells me we will have a month 11 report, and that will be badged, if you like, as a provisional outturn, because of course we come to the end of the financial year very soon now, within a week. And then the thing that for me is the most important thing is where we have savings within this financial year, can they continue into the next year, or were they one-off savings? So you'll see in table 1, the big table, you'll see that we have that extra column now of where a pressure is it's an ongoing pressure or a one-off pressure. And then we see that coming through into the new year, where we've already seen it, of course, at budget setting, where it becomes then a growth. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to hand over to Nicola Hicks for some further detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Officer Hicks.
Good afternoon, members. So just following on from Councillor Leishan's point about the reduced draw on reserves, you'll see that stated in bullet point 3 on the first page. So that's really important there, just so that, and we've tried to make it really transparent in bold around that reduced draw on the earmarked reserve to 11.026 million, from which what you'll see in table 1 was 38 million, which was the original forecast, which is what we set the budget with. So that's really important, and actually what we'd like to see is that reduced drawdown from reserve actually come down to nil. if at all possible, because that really then does protect the council's revenue position and the reserves that are there. Sorry, it's 36 million, not 38 million. If we just go down to bullet point 11, which is on page 8, I was just going to concentrate on the main changes from month 9 to month 10. So just in relation there to children's and families, you'll see that there is a decreased reduction on the external placement forecast overspend, but also they had some grant income that they've now allocated to that, which has made a real difference in terms of their forecast position for year end, and some reallocation of funding there that was originally forecast to go over to housing. So that's the detail behind that one, but that's also explained more in the appendice to children's. Just in relation to community service, there as another increase in forecast underspend of 1.4 million there, and some of that is around just general underspends across the service, but also attributable to the Yeovil Crematorium and Cemetery Committee, or burial budget as it's called, in terms of that forecast income to come into the budget there. So that's helped that improved position there. And just in terms of climate and place, we've got 1.255 million there change, and that's due to some waste overspend being reduced and some delays with car parking maintenance. And also we've got quite a forecast in terms of what we expected our planning service to cost us, because as a council, you know, we've got a increased use of agency and locums in that area, and there was quite a significant forecast spend there, but actually that's been able to be reduced. So that's the main reasons for the underspends there, but you'll also see in terms of our non-service. So when we talk about non-service, that means that things that aren't attributable directly to any particular service, they're things that are corporate functions, such as our borrowing and our interest payable there, and that's where we will always hopefully see an improved position there if we're able to align what we need for cash flow purposes in terms of borrowing only what we need and managing our cash flow effectively there. And we'll always set the budget at the start of the year in terms of the worst case position, in terms of actually if we had to borrow the entire amount, and actually kind of will see that cash flow position change there. So that's an improved position. So very positive in terms of the change from month 9 to month 10. Next paragraph there just talks about the dedicated schools grant, which we know is a hot topic in terms of what's happening there in the forecast year-end deficit there on dedicated school grants, but even that's got a decrease there in terms of the work that the team are doing to try and mitigate the deficit there. Just in terms of mitigations, we continue to focus on trying to improve our position, and I think the work that we've done to set next year's budget has helped our understanding of some of these issues, and the team continue to work with the services very closely to try and look at some of these areas of focus. Just in terms of bullet point 15 onwards, in terms of the MTFP savings, you'll see a slight improved position there in terms of the savings that have been achieved. As we see the month 11 report come through, I think what we'll see is that on track or at risk columns removed, and actually towards hitting year end, then it'll either be achieved or it'll be unachievable for this financial year. And then we need to look at the impact of that following through into next year. Just in terms of our collection fund there, just wanted to explain that we have seen a slight decrease there against our target in terms of our council tax collection. Working with the team, we don't actually think this is a true decrease. What happened was we implemented a new management income system, and there was a delay between the payments that come in and hit the bank and went through that new income management system to actually then hit the council tax account. So a number of payments were held just while the team were doing some of the checks in terms of that system being implemented. So what we're hoping to see is next in month 11 that come back up in terms of that was just a kind of one-off event in terms of that happening there. Just in terms of the council tax just being mindful of what I'm saying because it's a confidential appendix, but you'll see there's an appendix in the report which does write off a significant balance for council tax arrears, and that is, I would say it's one of the largest values we've had there, and as part of the financial regulations, although we as officers can sign it off, anything over 100,000 has to be reported to scrutiny. It's just part of the regulations, so that's why it's coming before you to view today. I think what I would say as well is we are seeing, as we are working on the system consolidation from all of the district systems into the one system for revs and beds, what we're seeing is they are cleansing some of the data and really looking at some of the arrears that are there and the status of those arrears, what's with our collection agency. So I think it's not unusual to see some write-offs towards the end of the financial year because the auditors will look to make sure that we've got balances in our accounts that are deemed to be truly collectible, or recovery action is in place to get that money back. So I think this is a significant one in terms of the value of it. And a question was posed to me separately around actually why is it taking this long to come forward as a write-off and what's happened previously, because of the value of it and the number of the years that it spans. Unfortunately, I don't think I've got anyone left in the current team who actually knows the complete history of it, but thinks there has been a significant amount of work to do with that account and numerous people who were involved in it. I also think that the paper is indacted, so it doesn't say who it is, but I think it was quite a challenging case to deal with, I would say, in terms of that one. So, but obviously, if we have to go into confidential session, I can say a bit more about that. Just in terms of the capital programme, there's just one addition in there, and I think it's on, I'm just trying to find it. Just 28, bullet point 28, there's just some additional DFG, and that's the only change in terms of the programme. Another question that was posed to me is, as you've changed the capital programme, does that mean it needs to go up to full council for approval? It only needs to go up to full council for approval if we are costing the council more money. So if we were changing the capital programme and there was an increase to borrowing, then it would need to go up to council, but not because it's got external funding linked to it. But other than that, with capital, we're on target. It's not a lot of change from the previous month reported to members, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Our first speaker is Councillor Johnson.
Thank you for that report. I guess in light of the council tax, I'm just seeking reassurance that we are confident that we have the right processes in place now to ensure that monies collected are operating as well as they possibly can. And the other point I just wanted to raise is, I mentioned it, community scrutiny. The table 1, where we get income, it'd be really helpful in understanding that you've mentioned a few times now grants that have come in that weren't expected or that have affected the situation. That's not reflected in any way in the table 1, and I would really like to have a table that kind of breaks down what is grant income, what is rate collection income, what is, and this, just to get a feel for what things are shifting. And I don't know if that's possible, because it would certainly aid with understanding where the changes are coming from. If you're looking at a glance to think, okay, that's because they've got new grant income, rather than having to read the text.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that point away and have a chat with the team about how we could present that in the paper. Just in terms of debt collection, you'll see from the previous report, it's been picked up around their advice to us around to review our debt collection, and actually having a not a centralised, but kind of a one route of debt collection across the council. That's something that I've taken to look at with the team, and actually next month you will see come forward the debt management policy, which is our new approach to how actually we're going to manage debt. And as we build the revs and bends system as well, we're looking at whether individually they do debt collection and they will actually do, at what point would it be better to look at it as a collective, one customer looking at, a debt team looking at a customer's debt across the council as a whole. So I think that's something we're certainly looking at. In terms of the debt collection, in terms of the way it's working at the moment, I would say it's there, it's working, certainly with revenues and benefits. But I do wonder whether there's opportunity to look at whether we could have a bigger debt collection team and actually what the financial effect of that would be on the council, because I'm convinced it would probably more than pay for itself in terms of that money coming back into the authority. Because we do have quite a sizable, as a council, we are a large council, but we do have quite a sizable debt. And some of that is because we're carrying the legacy council's debts as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember last year when we had this month 10 report, and it was right on a knife edge. And it's so much better for me to see that we have this report in front of us, where the financial team have, for want of a better word, stopped the blood flow from the wound. And I would just like to make public that the team have done really extremely well in bringing a large budget under some sort of control and giving us reserves to go forward into the future years. Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, I wanted to thank Ms. Hicks. On my list of questions, you already answered more than half of them. So there was only a couple of them left. I was going to just ask for a bit of clarification. One is just to get a bit of an understanding of the confidence in the figures in Table 1, because one would imagine as you come close to the end of the year, we're getting close to the end point of the budget, and therefore we should be narrowing down changes. But there seems to be an awful lot of big changes. So there's like 8 lines that have in a month moved by over £500,000 in one direction or the other, and just wanted to get an understanding of your confidence in the figures that we're working to, because as I say, you'd imagine as you get closer to the target, the variances should start to reduce. And the other question I wanted to ask was on the capital profiling on page 13. I think we've gone more than half of the original budget has been deferred to future years, and it was just again what's the confidence in the fact that we can actually deliver those figures in future years when there's been such a major change in the profiling for this year?
So I think it will be, as Councillor Lation has said, it will be interesting to see the month 11 figures, because I do wonder if they will show increased improvement. And one thing I would say is that we really are pushing the services with the mitigations to actually manage their overspends and bring it down to help the council's position. And that's one thing I would say our current 151 has been really strong on, especially in relation to children's, adults, in terms of the work we're doing in terms of the financial recovery boards. And I do think we are seeing some of that come through in the figures. So I can't guarantee they're not going to be swing, but actually I'd rather, if they are going to come under is an improved position, that's a good thing. So in terms of capital, we've worked really closely to try and make that a more accurate reflection of the spend that's likely to go out on capital. But I think I would say sometimes it's not us, it's external factors that mean that money can't be spent on that capital programme, such as delays with builders or doesn't have planning permission or,
Thank you. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair. So my question largely centres around the overspend in climate and place, which is reduced but still in place. And I noticed that it's been mitigated somewhat by things like holding vacancies, so not recruiting, etc. I did note that on table 1, infrastructure and transport is green and underspent. And yet when you go to page 9, it says that one of the problems is ongoing pressures in highways services. So I just wondered how those pressures seem to be some of the causes of the overspend from the way I read the report. And yet it's coming up as green on the table, which means that it's within acceptable limits. And the other question is, obviously, there's news out now that there's going to be further government grants towards road repairs, and they seem to have some kind of rules around them. It's very new, so you won't know overall, but would that make a change to this year's planned works? Because there are roads everywhere that people are constantly telling me are problematic, and I just wondered, in terms of road surfacing, are we likely to see the plan increase this year, or are we not going to have the capacity to be able to do that in terms of staffing? Does that make sense? Sorry.
It does make sense. I'm not an expert in road matters, but I know that we have got the correspondence from government today. It's hit my inbox in terms of reading that, and that's around actually making sure that we can justify the spend that's made in those areas to get the grant money to come in. So I think they want evidence that the money's been spent as the grant has been given, and that's actually not unusual for grants. Government grants, a lot of our regeneration schemes, a lot of the spend that we make through capital, we do have to do quarterly returns to government to show that we've spent it, and that all comes through myself and Maria to sign off. But I don't know in terms of the plan for this year whether it will. I think in our capital programme we've got a line for highways and transport, and but I don't think there's specifics in there in terms of the plan. I don't know if you can remember, Councillor Lation, because it was a topic discussed this morning as well.
It was a topic that we discussed this morning about the single figure. I think it was 151 million under highways schemes. And I also know that of Maria's view that until a grant is confirmed, it is not put out under the columns for that directorate. It is held centrally as a corporate income to be confirmed, because as she rightly said to me, if the minute you think you're going to get a grant, you allocate that to the directorate in that year and over those months, so you profile it, then it's fair that that directorate thinks they've got that money to spend. And Maria's view was, and I definitely cannot argue with her, is that when a grant is applied for, or there's promise, that it's held centrally and corporately until it's confirmed, and then it's put out to the directorate. And I just thought that sounded like really good practice.
James.
Chair, if I may, just to add a little bit more kind of detail to it as well. I know that the team are working through that plan because it's a matter that's been discussed. There are a couple of risks that happen every year when this happens from government, though, just for scrutiny members' clarity. All councils get the same money at the same time, so often the supply chain starts to get stretched. So I think one of the key things that, in terms of are there going to be more schemes and delivered, clearly the answer to that would be yes, but how many would be a role for the team to develop now, simply because it's not just our contractor, it's the supply chain for the materials that are required that often get stretched at this particular point. But interestingly, government's announcement is predicated on two things. One is fixing potholes, and one is also the proactive elements around resurfacing and those types of activities. So I know that the service director is working that through at the moment, but 75% of the funding has been confirmed, with 25% agreed upon performance, a further 25% agreed on performance. So the team are working out what those metrics look like, but it has only got recently. So I think the answer is yes, but where and how many is unclear at this point in time until we know what the parameters are and whether the supply chain can cope.
Thank you very much.
Chair, could I answer the first question?
Yes, please.
So I think
yeah,
what you're saying is what you're seeing in this table 1 is actually they're able to mitigate their overspend in one particular element of their budget by underspends in other areas. So the fact that they've got vacancies in there will be helping to mitigate the overspend in other areas within the same service budget. But what we're going to see is, as part of the workforce saving that's gone through, the team are currently building 25-26 budget, stripping out that £34 million worth of vacancy savings. So the fact that some of the services are able to mitigate some of their overspends currently from holding vacancies, they're not going to have the same flexibility next year from April, because obviously a lot of that budget is going to come out.
And Councillor C.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I think it is very good news that we are not putting a £20 million on our credit card this year. And I echo Councillor Hobhouse's thanks to the team for their part in getting on top of the problem. I'm also interested to see how much of the discussion of detail lines has centred around dunning, debt collection in the extreme, but dunning is usually just chasing people to pay. And I agree with Nicola Hicks that that centralisation is something which has worked in the past, should be considered again. It does tend to give you a very substantial improvement if you have specialists working it. And one of the reasons why you would want specialists is at the very personal level, when you're talking about individuals, and in the confidential annex, we do get into individual cases. One of the bigger problems that you have is the person who has got themselves into debt and now can't work out how to get out of debt, and so they deny or don't open the envelopes. Effectively, you know, one of the things which I was always told was a sign of a problem household was when you'd go in and find a stack of envelopes on the fridge, because that was usually, that looks like a bill, I'm going to put that to one side. I think it's really important that we bear in mind that early intervention, and by that I'm talking about early dunning, but followed up by support work, it's really critical to avoid putting pressure on individuals that may lead to mental ill health. And that is specialist work that is best centralised, frankly. I find the visualisation of data somewhat lacking here. There are some very large proportions of spends being moved over, particularly in the capital programme from one year to the next, where I think were it a picture, we might be more alarmed than it is in a table, because we would see that it's actually a large capital expenditure tends to be work not yet done. It tends to be stuff we haven't got around to, and if we're pushing a bow wave of that, we need to have that come to us as it as clearly communicated. And I would encourage the development of some pictorial representation of movements. I found it particularly enlightening back in considering the budget to do a waterfall chart of the income and the outgoings, because it really did drive home the message of how tiny some of the budgets are in proportion to adults in particular expenditure. And I just wanted to ask a specific question on the adult social care. There's a what looks to me like a Dunning win. In other words, better collection of fees. I'm presuming that will be a one-off and might go the other way if they can't sustain their current improvement. Am I right?
Yeah, so there has been an improvement in that area in terms of the team. The financial assessments team have got up to date with the backlog of assessments that were needed. But what we're finding now is they are going back through the backlog of reassessments that need to be done. So I think you will see that flux as we go along.
So just for clarity, is that a repeated one-off?
I think it's a repeated one-off to get us into a position where they then become more regular.
Is there anybody else who wishes to comment, please, either in the room or online? No. Well, the recommendations are before us, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't heard a great deal other than what is noted as the Scrutiny Committee for Corporate Resources asked to consider and comment upon the following recommendations. The Executive will consider at its next meeting on the 7th of April. So you've got all of those listed from A to N, and the N is the note the approved write-offs, including the confidential appendix N. Does anybody wish to add anything to those? No? Okay, well, I'll move that is what we do from the chair. May I see that seconded, please? May I see all those in favour? Right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think that then brings us to the conclusion of this meeting. Can I thank you all very much for your attendance and input? And obviously we will be getting in touch with many of you about the scrutiny review process. Thank you all very much.